Are you ready?
My coach, Barbara H. Smith. Why did I hire her? Because she's the best.
Barbara H. Smith is a powerhouse. She just walks in the room and grabs your attention, and she does that in a way that just makes you feel loved and like she's paying attention to you, she cares about you, and she wants to see you be your best self.
The coaching that I am receiving from Barbara H. Smith gives me confidence.
She was able to dig inside and find a passion that was deep within me.
Barbara's energy is one of the reasons that I had to have her as my coach. I loved the way she is real with people.
The reason I felt like I needed a coach was because I have some big goals and I needed to build my confidence. I knew that Barbara could help me do that.
One conversation with Barbara H. Smith and she will be able to tell you what it is you're missing.
I felt that I could trust her.
I would definitely recommend to get coaching from Barbara H. Smith if you feel like you need to level up your confidence. She would just help you feel like bold, like you can take on the world.
She has really shown me who I am. She has changed my mindset to a place that I know that I am more powerful today than I would have ever been if I had never met Barbara Smith.
Hey, here we go. So happy you're here today. It's the Barbara H. Smith Show, and we are excited that you're with us today. What's the show about? We're bringing you news, entertainment. We're bringing you business owners who are stepping up and leveling up their game. And we're talking about how you present, how you can speak better, come up higher, do more. Greater things are in your future. And so today we want to get started with our show. I am so excited, beyond belief, to the moon and back with our guest. Michael C. Hitchcock is the president and founder of Charles Atwater Group, LLC, with more than 30 years experience leading teams and developing leaders. He's a certified coach and consultant providing training, strategy, leadership, and business development. Mike helps corporations and individuals with leadership, business development, performance improvements, and fulfilling their entrepreneurial dreams. Guess what else? Mike served us. He served his country. He is a retired United States Marine Corps officer and combat veteran with over 20 years of active duty military service. And after he retired from the Marine Corps, he served as a military analyst for Booz Allen. Mike supported the former United States Joint Forces Command's Joint Experimentation Division. And as a military analyst, he was responsible for designing, synchronizing, integrating experimentation objectives. Guess what? Mike also served as a chief operating officer for the B&D Consulting. Mike, Mr. Hitchcock, served as a dedicated strategic partner to all of his companies. And Mike, who retired in 2009, holds a Bachelor's of Science in Economics. He also holds an MBA from the University of Phoenix and is a doctoral candidate at Regent University studying strategic leadership with a concentration in strategic foresight. Help me bring to the show Michael C. Hitchcock.
Hey girl, how are you?
How you like that introduction, bruh?
I couldn't have written it any better myself.
I love that you're here. We want to jump right in and let our audience know a little bit more about who Mike Hitchcock is. So the first question I want to ask you is, you started a military career. What or why, more than why, would you go into the United States Marine Corps?
If you remember that that movie, I think it was Officer and a Gentleman, and I think Mayo said, I had no place else to go.
What do you mean by that?
No, seriously, it was just something I always wanted to do. I mean, I grew up hearing a lot of the interesting stories from military veterans, And the Army wasn't necessarily for me, but the Marine Corps was always intriguing. So after 4 years of college, and that wasn't an option. My mother said I could do whatever I wanted to do, but I had to give her 4 years of college first. So after I finished my degree, signed on a dotted line, and 20 years later, here I am.
So it looked like 20 years. Did it seem like it was going to be 20 years? Were you planning on doing 20 years?
No, I don't think you ever really go in planning to do 20 years. Particularly the way I went in, we had to essentially reapply every 4 years to stay in. So it was incredibly competitive. And in fact, I think after the initial Gulf War, I had to apply to stay in. I was selected to stay in for another 4 years, went off to Ann Arbor, Michigan, recruited for 4 years at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. And then I was actually looking for jobs in the pharmaceutical industry. Had a couple of great job offers, and the Marine Corps called me back in and said, nope, we have one other assignment for you to go to. So the number of challenges kept coming and coming and coming. So I ended up eventually staying for 20 years.
Now, what made you were interested in the pharmaceutical industry? What?
No, again, at that stage of my life, I think it was only 25, 26 years old. So I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to stay in the Marine Corps. So it was out doing the typical job search. So I was in an area that had a lot of industry, particularly on the pharmaceutical side. We also had furniture manufacturing, obviously the automotive manufacturers. So it was just a process of elimination through the job search. And they had made the best offer. So I was actually going to pursue it.
Okay. So now let's talk some about your current state of affairs. You started the Charles Atwater Group, and I don't know the connection between Charles Atwater and Mike Hitchcock. You want to explain why that?
Yeah, great question. Great question. So I named the company after my grandfather, Charles Atwater. He was a major influence in my life growing up, and I couldn't think of a better tribute than to name the company after him. My middle name happens to be Charles, but also I didn't want the company to be connected to my name and my persona. I wanted the company to grow and develop its own personality based on the services that we provided to our customers and based on how well our employees were actually servicing our customers as well. So it wasn't necessarily about me. It's about our customers and the folks that work with us.
That's interesting because you talk about your customers. I remember you were part of the Joint Forces Command, and in the Joint Forces Command, what were your exact duties there? What did you do there?
Yeah, so I was in Joint Forces Command from 2003 until about 2009 or 10. Various jobs. So part of that time was active duty, where I had worked with the Joint Staff J7, which was the training side of U.S. Joint Forces Command. That part, I had spent about 3 to 4 years standing up what they call the Accreditation and Certification Branch, which was basically helping all the services figure out how they're going to play nice together in different.
And they never did. They never did.
They never figured that out. But we got a lot of money from Congress, and we did some great things to help the services play with one another in different joint environments. From there, just as I was about ready to retire, my last 18 months, I was moved over to the Joint Experimentation Branch, where I spent a lot of time with the Joint Urban Operations Directorate. They had stood up the JUO office in response to a lot of the work that we were doing over in Iraq and Afghanistan. So in that capacity, we're really trying to figure out how to operate in an urban environment. So I was the Marine Corps' liaison between the Marine Corps Warfighting Lab out of Quantico, Virginia, and the Joint Staff in Suffolk, Virginia. So a lot of that was just liaison work, but it was also looking at the different capabilities that all the services needed and what would work best in those joint urban environments. After I retired, I got hired on by Booz Allen Hamilton to actually go back into the wargaming and joint urban operations environment again. I stayed in that area for about another year and a half or so. Leaving that opportunity, I ended up back in the Joint Staff J7. I started my company after I left Booz Allen and got hired on by another small company to go back inside the Joint Staff to work kind of on another joint urban operations project, but it was more modeling and simulation focused. So this was an initiative that General Mattis had put in place to figure out how we could deliver a simulated or an augmented reality environment to the infantry guys that were on the ground. So they're basically looking at how you could put together a laptop system that 12 Marines or soldiers could basically rehearse the operations that they were actually doing within a virtual environment before they actually went into to execute it for real. So that was a really exciting project. Stayed with that project for about a year and a half, 2 years, and then moved on to some other work over with U.S. Army TRADOC.
And U.S. Army TRADOC is the training arm of the Army. What was interesting about being in Joint Forces Command was the fact that they were supposed to be joint, meaning play nice, fellas and ladies, in the sandbox. And it was, what were the challenges between not being in the Army, but being in the Navy, not being in the Navy, but being in the Air Force? And what are the differences that it makes it difficult for them to communicate? Because we want to talk about communication in a minute.
Yeah, so I think it's a couple of things. So one, I think it's a misnomer that all the services don't want to play nice together. They normally do play nice together, with the exception of when it comes to fighting over budgets. Then it's everyone for themselves, right? But I think the biggest challenge is really culture. And when you look at the different services and what their different missions are, naturally they form their own cultures. And so once you understand and have an appreciation for what an organization's roles and responsibilities are within the overall mission that you're trying to accomplish, once you figure that out, you can pretty much figure out how to play nice with one another, because we really are all there for the same reason. But there are some technical challenges in terms of, again, this kind of goes back to budgets, and this is one of the things that the Joint Forces Command was supposed to kind of help us work through. There's the technical side of making sure that all your communications and all your technologies can talk to all of the different services. So the services have done a lot of work over the last few decades to try to make sure, as we're buying different pieces of equipment, that they're all compatible and they can all work across all the other services. That might seem easy, but it's not. When you're working in a maritime environment and you're dealing with salt and corrosion and all sorts of things that come with working in that maritime environment, that's different than the Air Force that typically doesn't operate in that environment. So the requirements for their equipment are going to be a little bit different than what you might find for some of the other services. So it's, at the end of the day, it's about putting a process in place where everyone can really understand what the needs and responsibilities are of each service, and making sure that we're communicating across all of the services, so that when we do buy equipment and we are trying to figure out how we're going to train and operate together, that we're all operating off the same sheet of music.
And that's key, right into a segue about communication. All right, so we as people need to communicate. We as services need to communicate. Why is it so difficult for us to convey a message?
Yeah, so it's, if you've been married, you know that people, particularly spouses, that a lot of times they talk past one another, right? And it's because ultimately we're all inherently different, right? And we have different styles of communication. We speak differently, we receive information differently. So part of figuring out that communication challenges is understanding people. Whether you're using, whatever assessment tool you want to use. I'm familiar with the DISC profile by Wiley. If you use the DISC profile, it talks about the different types of personalities that people have and how you can essentially adjust your communication style to be more effective in the way you communicate with somebody that might be an introvert, or somebody that might be very, very excitable when you talk to them. So it's really understanding how different people communicate, and more importantly, it's taking the time to understand how different people communicate. And if you're if you're on the influence side of the DISC profile like myself, I have a difficult time listening. I like to talk, so I know that about myself. So when I'm in a conversation, I have to harness every fiber of my being to shut my mouth and listen. And it's hard. And I wish I would have known that years ago. I probably wouldn't have got divorced a couple of different times. Right? So, you get, at some point, as my grandfather used to say, that's all part of growing up, right? You eventually figure it out, some a little bit faster than others. But at the end of the day, it's about communicating and understanding how other folks communicate and making sure that you are listening more than you're talking.
Okay, so let's do this little exercise. All right. You're looking at the disc profile. You know that you have certain tendencies. Your tendencies are to talk. So am I. So how do we, the two of us, with almost a similar disc profile, I like to talk, very little on listening, although Mark Lee says I listen. I've learned to listen better, okay? How do you get someone who always likes to talk to learn how to listen? Because listening is part of the communication, right? How do you get someone who always likes to talk to listen? What do you tell them?
Yeah, I mean, so again, first step is recognize that that's something that's a challenge for you, right? And so knowing that and going into, and I literally just had this experience a couple of weeks ago. One of the gals that I do some consulting with, she is an avid talker. And before I go into those meetings with her, I know that I have to restrain myself and let her do a lot of the talking, and that it's not going to be about me trying to get my point across. Or if I am, there will be very short, specific things that I want to say and come across. And I will know that when she gets ready to respond, it's going to be 3, 4, maybe 5 minutes before I get ready to chime in again. So you have to be very intentional about the way that you, for me anyway, I have to be very intentional when I know that I'm engaging with someone who is like me, that I have to be the one that steps back and kind of restrains myself. Mostly because I've had the training. So I know better, right? So if I'm trained, then I shouldn't be so impulsive to just go back to my normal comfort zone. I know if I want to be productive and get something out of that meeting, that I have to rely on my training and go back and go, okay, so this is an environment where I'm going to have to be very restrained. It's going to be tough, but I'm going to have to be restrained. I'm going to have to listen a lot.
So that is so valuable. What I want you to talk to me now about is your life experience. What I mean by that, as you have matured, I see the little salt and pepper, that little seasoning going on right here. As you got a little more seasoned, what changed in your life that made you want to pursue what you're pursuing now? And tell us what you're pursuing now too.
So right now I'm kind of on, as you and I have spoke before, I'm kind of on a journey to figure out what that third chapter of my life looks like, right? So I've done a lot of coaching and consulting over the last few years. Now it's really trying to find what that niche space is for me. Most of it has been centered on business development, coaching and consulting for small companies, mostly within the federal government space. I have branched out and have consulted for a couple of different franchises and mortgage companies over the last couple of years or so. But I think a lot of it, I had to get to the point in my life where I kept trying to climb these ladders, and there's nothing wrong with climbing the ladder, but I was climbing the wrong ladder. I was climbing a ladder that was focused on wealth accumulation and not necessarily trying to focus on happiness.
Well, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with wealth accumulation? What's wrong with that, Mike? What's wrong?
Hey, go for it. You want to run that race? Go for it. I think I had the realization a few years ago, and it was right after a divorce, where I started being a little bit reflective, and I started looking back, and I remember the times when I was making the most amount of money I had ever made, 2 or 3 times the amount that I was making when I was on active duty, I was the most miserable.
Say it again.
I was the most miserable. I was working from probably just about every weekend. I was working 12 to 14, 16 hours a day. And I kept telling myself that this is fun, this is exciting, this is what you're supposed to be doing. It's because I didn't know anything else. I had come from an environment when, literally going back to probably high school, where I was always working 2 and 3 jobs. I was always working on the weekends. It was always school, work. So when I came on active duty, the Marine Corps work ethic was no different. We're always working long hours, weekends, deployments, you name it. So that was just the life I knew. And so when I finally came out of that space and started figuring out what one of the congressmen said, reclaiming my time, it was eye-opening. When you can get up in the morning and say, yeah, I think I want to work today, or no, I don't. I'd like to read a book, or I'm going to take 3 weeks off and go to Nicaragua and hang out on the beach.
But what made you do that? What made you come to that realization? Why did you do that at that moment?
Which part? Go to Nicaragua?
No, stop and reflect on, hey, maybe this trading hours for dollars is not what I want to do. Maybe this
it was probably my divorce. You know, if you what I say, happy life, happy wife. Well, I didn't have a happy life or a happy wife. So, you know, so strike out on two accounts. And you're going, okay, well, that equation is not working.
That's not working.
That's not working. And the more money I made, the harder I worked, the less time I spent with her. That wasn't working. So I think it was just that realization that that and my dad passing away at 70, I think he was 77 when he passed away. And I'm looking at my age, I'm like, well, let's see, I'm 55.
Let's do this math.
It's like, exactly. I can do marine math. It gives me about 20 years if I'm lucky. And then God's not going to, nobody guarantees you tomorrow.
That's right.
On the high end, I might have 20 years left. I said, this is the way I want to live my next 20 years. So, I'm in no hurry to figure out what that next niche looks like. I'm in a hurry to figure out how to, enjoy life, enjoy the time with my friends and my family, and really start enjoying, the time that I have left. And that sounds kind of dark, but hey, tomorrow ain't guaranteed. Look, I mean, we just had a pandemic. And interestingly enough, so right after I made that decision, got rid of the big house, got rid of all my debt, all that mess, and we ran into a pandemic. And I was in a position financially where it didn't matter if I never made another dime working as a consultant or whatever, because I had readjusted my lifestyle where I could just live off of, my passive income from my military retirement and a couple of other sources. And I thought, wow, so this is what having time looks like. This is what retirement would look like.
Oh, well, hold on for a second, because right before the pandemic, you made a statement that I want you to really dig into for some people in the audience. All right. So you had this big house. You had all the luxuries. You had everything you wanted. You had, all of this, what I call stuff. And then you made a conscious decision to do what?
Get rid of it.
And I laugh, but it's not funny. It's the truth.
You're working for stuff. You're working for stuff. And so, yeah, I mean, and quite, you and I talked about this, it became a math problem, right? So you look at the house and, let's say the house is, let's say your mortgage is, 25, $3,000 a month, right? You look at what you're paying in property taxes and about, $5,000 in property taxes, look at what you're paying in insurance, another $2,700 in insurance, looking at HOA fees, another $2,000 a year or $1,500 a year for HOA fees. You're throwing out almost $7,000 to $8,000 a year that you're never going to get back. You're never going to get it back. So, at the end of the day, everyone talks about how their homes appreciate and you're making all this money when you go sell it. Most people aren't calculating what you paid in property taxes, what you paid in HOA fees, what you paid. And I didn't even add on the interest on the loan that you paid. When people, well, you have to live somewhere, you do. But it's a matter of how much of your overall income do you want to spend on something that you're not going to get a return on. And so there's a right way to do it. Dave Ramsey talks about a number of different ways to scale up and buy a house. And the other thing was I ran into one of my neighbors who lived like 3 doors down from me. And I met her right after I'd actually left the neighborhood. I didn't even know she lived there. And she was going through a divorce. We started talking. And she was like, her and her husband bought a house 3 doors down and paid cash for it. And I'm like, yeah, that's the way you do it. If you're going to have a house of that size, that magnitude, you pay cash for it. And that way, again, you can still enjoy your lifestyle and those other sort of things. So at the end of the day, it's just everyone's going to live the way they want to live. And if you want to spend all your money trying to impress folks with the house you're living in, the car you're driving, and at the end of the day, you're miserable. As Denzel Washington said, nobody ever has seen a U-Haul following a hearse.
You got that right.
You can't bring it with you, right?
Right. So let's switch gears for a second and talk some about our kids. How do we help our kids? I know you're going to be participating on the Black Business Expo USA and providing scholarships and laptops to our kids. Talk some about what it means to give back.
Oh man, I think it's important because obviously they're the future. But I think we have to look at what we're giving back, right? The laptops are great, the scholarships are great, but if we're not giving back that other critical component, the critical thinking skills, the life skills, right? So kids today can go to college, got a scholarship, you got your laptop, you can follow the same track that I did. You can make all this money and still be miserable, right? So we talk a whole lot about work-life balance, but we don't educate them on how to have that work-life balance. The good news is I think this current generation has kind of figured that out. My stepson, right after he graduated from college, got a pretty good paying job with Geico. About a year later, went to work for another company called 2U up in DC. And before he started with 2U, he's like, yeah, I got this trip I'm going overseas and I'll be gone for like 3 weeks. And I'm like, you told him that during the interview? He's like, yeah. He goes, I've had this trip planned. And the company was okay with it. And that same company was like, yeah, we don't have a leave policy. You take as much leave as you want.
Wow.
As long as you get your work done, we don't care. So there's a whole new generation that's coming along that is kind of already figured out by watching, I think, their parents do all this craziness, that they're taking a different path. They're more entrepreneurial than we are. And so at the end of the day, to answer your question specifically, I think the education is essential. It's critical. It's important. But we also have to arm them with the right life skill tools. So once they get that money, they're spending it wisely and they're pursuing happiness and not just a paycheck.
Are you providing some of those consulting ways for young people to understand those life skill balances, some of those life skills, some of those training techniques that will give them success in their lives? Are you providing that with the Atwater Group?
Yeah, so I think as part of our coaching and consulting engagements, I mean that's part of those conversations. It's kind of heartening. My stepson called a few days ago and I was like, he just got a job with Deloitte. Then I'm like, how did you get in with Deloitte doing information technology work? He goes, well, I took your advice. So a friend of mine had worked for Deloitte, and I asked him, could he make an introduction? And he got me an interview, and he sold himself in the interview. And I'm like, you did listen. I'm like, good for you. So I think, and that's another important thing, right? I mean, young adults, they watch what we do, they listen to what we say. They may not always follow it, but don't think that they're not watching and they're not listening, because they are. So modeling those correct behaviors, whether you're in a coaching environment or whether you're in a professional environment, they're going to model those behaviors, rightfully or wrongfully so. So I think it's important that we obviously show the right example for them to follow down the road.
And that is true, because our children, whether they're our children by birth or whether our children by surroundings, they don't watch what we say. They watch what we do. Don't talk about it, be about it. And with that, we're going to take a commercial break and we'll be right back. Don't go away. I'll be right here. Hi, I'm Barbara H. Smith, known as the Masterful Presenter.
If you could figure out a universal language, personality code that connects with potential client, how powerful would that be?
I empower people to communicate better what they do, what they have, and what they bring to the table.
People love to buy. I don't need you to sell it to me. I come in there with an intention, and that's what you're going to do going forward. You're going to go into networking events with intention.
I am here benefiting from the wisdom of Barbara Smith.
She gave so much information on how I can just excel in my business, and I'm taking it to a whole nother level.
I'm learning a lot that I didn't really know about my business.
The information that she's been presenting has been informative and helpful to me.
If you have not been in the presence of Miss Holmes Smith, you need to make sure you do so. Her workshops are authentic. She comes with such training, and she just graces you with her presence, and she allows you to feel the experience like none other before.
No volume.
So what do you think about that commercial?
There you go. I love it. That's awesome.
Listen, it's about being able to present. It's about being able to coach, right? So talk to me about how you obtain a client. Bring me through the process. How do they first even know who you are? And then how do you take them through the process to become your client?
Yeah, great question. So a number of different channels, right? So a lot of it begins with networking, putting yourself out there in different environments, letting people know who you are, what it is that you do, what services that you offer. Referrals are great. If you can build your business through referrals, that is the best and most satisfying. And quite frankly, that's how most of my business has grown over the last few years, is through the networking as well as the referral base that I have. But it's also about your branding, getting out, doing webinars. So again, getting your message out so people understand, hey, this is who you are. These are the services that you offer. This is how you can help them down the paths that they're seeking to improve. One of the challenges that we run into, that I personally have run into, particularly on the government consulting side, is most of the folks that look at federal government consulting on the business development side, trying to win federal government contracts. A lot of folks don't want to compensate for that work, and that's okay. I didn't pay somebody to learn how to do it, but understand there's a trade-off between, learning as you go and going out and getting trained by someone who knows the business and can help you through it. Eventually, there's a number of clients that I've had where I've recommended, hey, go out and get the proposal training, learn how to write these proposals. If you don't, at the end of the day, you're going to have to invest your time and your money to educate yourself. I don't care what it is you're doing, what market you're in. Just don't think you can show up and be successful. You have to educate yourself in the market that you're in. And so my advice to people would be, get educated about, most importantly, about your customer base. Know your customers, know what keeps them up at night. So when you're talking to them, if you don't know what keeps them up that night, you can have that conversation and ask them what keeps them up at night. And you can gear your services or your products in a way, in a manner which will help them solve some of their problems.
So one of the things you and I talked about at length, Mike, was becoming a speaker, becoming a coach. People have asked, how do you become a speaker? How do you become a coach? So I can talk to the speaker side. I want you to talk, and the coach side, but I want you to talk some about, how did you decide that coaching was for you first? And then secondly, how did you get to coaching clients in your business?
Yeah, so great question. So failure. When I was the chief operating officer for the company up in Maryland, I had some challenges with the staff. And part of it wasn't necessarily the challenges I had with the staff as much as it was with the CEO had a certain expectation. He wanted the Marine to come in and be the hard-nosed Marine and whip everybody into shape. And as you and I have talked, I'm kind of out of that business now. That's not the way I see a leadership position and how you act as a leader. And so there was we had kind of butted heads in terms of the way he wanted my role to interact with the employees. And what I recognized after I left that company was I needed better tools to coach him and to help him understand that this was a more appropriate role for me, and we could achieve the results that he was looking for without necessarily going down this authoritarian, hard-nosed, leadership style that he thought would make a difference. And so I didn't, at that time, I had gone through a coaching course early in my Marine Corps career when I was a young captain. And it wasn't until after I left there that I was like, oh, wait a minute. I actually had the tools to do that. It's been a minute since I had taken that course, so I need to get refreshed on this again. And so I signed up for a executive coaching course out of Sarasota, Florida, went down, spent about 3 or 4 days down there going through the certification course, and then came back and saying, okay, so now I know I have the tools and the skill set to do this. And interestingly enough, I thought those tools are actually very much applicable for the guys that are coming out of the military that end up going back into an organization like Joint Forces Command. Because a lot of times what they end up doing is they end up going back into the same military organization that they left. And they're trying to impose their leadership styles based on the last position that they held
in the military.
Right, while they're in that organization. And that don't fly. You're no longer in uniform. They're looking for your advice and counsel. So a lot of times it's a matter of how you deliver that message, and coaching really helps you deliver that message. So from there, it was really a matter of me being able to talk to people and have a conversation about how I was in a position that I could help them with some of the challenges that they had. And it's an ongoing process. I mean, I have an ongoing relationship with a local franchise, which is where I do most of my coaching and consulting. And a lot of it is focused on, it's a very young demographic. First time they've been in leadership or management positions. They don't understand what their roles and responsibilities are as young leaders. So to me, it's a unique opportunity to get to help shape the next generation of leaders when they're 18, 19 years old, in some cases, sometimes 16, 17 years old, because now they're a team leader, in the back of the restaurant on fries or sandwiches or whatever, but it's their first exposure to actually being responsible and accountable to someone other than themselves.
And you're talking about young people. We've got some old heads that don't know what they want to do, don't know how to lead, and they use this authoritarian modality to beat people over the head, because everybody that's in a leadership position should not be in leadership. There's a difference between managing and leading. You want to talk to me about what the difference is?
Yeah, so that's interesting you bring that up. And so one of the things you find out very early on in your military career, that in order for you to be a good leader, you have to be a good follower. And so, the first things they do when you go through officer candidate school is they are constantly evaluating you in subordinate positions. And your peers are evaluating you when you're leading and when you're following. So you get some really good feedback on how well you do when you're not necessarily in a position of authority, right? So one of the first things you have to figure out is, how do you play well with others, right? And so we kind of figure that out early in our career. Sometimes we forget and maybe reminded as we get a little bit more senior. But at the end of the day, you have to figure that part out. Managing is, you manage resources, and people say that, people are resources. People are people, and people have feelings, they have emotions, they have good days, they have bad days. And as a leader, it's your responsibility to understand and know the people who work for you. And if you're really smart, you will take on a servant leadership mentality where you are there to serve them.
Say it again.
You are there to serve them. You are not there to run roughshod over them. You are their enablers. You are there to provide them with the resources, the capabilities, and the tools that they need to be successful. And that just doesn't mean the budgets, the computers. It means the emotional support, the personal support, all of those things that are all encompassing that you can find to help your people succeed. And, I had that conversation with some of our young leaders. So, they didn't realize that, you have a snowstorm or you have a power outage. And again, some of these young folks that are working in these fast food restaurants, it's their first job. So they may not think about, oh, I need to put some stuff in a cooler before I leave work, before I leave the house, because the meat's going to be spoiled while I'm at work for the next 4 or 5 hours, right? Well, you might want to send out an email kind of thinking ahead to help these young folks out. And I don't think sometimes leaders think far enough down of what their folks are experiencing, which is why it's important that you get down in the trenches with them, figure out what it is that they're thinking, what they're feeling, and understand how to walk a mile in their shoes. And once you've done that, you'll be able to make much better decisions that will enable them to meet your expectations and ultimately the company's mission and objectives.
Well, see, here's the thing. Many a manager feels like I've arrived. I'm the boss. You do as I say, not as I do. You do as I tell you to do. Instead of what you just described is understanding the people that work with you. I had a conversation with a lady earlier today, and I told her, I said, we have been forced into this remote work situation. There are many companies, for example, who did not want to do remote work pre-pandemic. Then they were forced to do it. And when they were forced to do it, they discovered something that they did not expect. They discovered that people are more productive most times at home. Why? Because they're happier in their own environments. They're working longer hours. They're focused on their work. They're not stopping at the cooler talking to Becky and Barbara and Brenda for an hour while they're trying to get their work done. So they discovered more work out of people they were browbeating because they were in front of them every day, right? So we as leaders, let's call ourselves leaders, have to make people understand that we're there as their support system. And speaking of support systems, I want you to tell me, if you have a team, how you built your team.
Yeah. So before we move on to that question, let me kind of digress for a little bit. So let's call that what it is. That's a trust issue, right? That's a trust issue. If and we see this in government all the time, where government wants the butt in the seat, where I can see you working every day. Because if I don't see you, then you're not getting your work done. There's something else going on. So when people, to your point, when they're suddenly working at home, and it's like, oh, yeah, I need to get this done. I can throw a load of laundry in. Oh, I can make my kid a sandwich real quick, and I'm still getting after it because I know I have a task that I have to complete.
Right.
Productivity starts to go up. And those who aren't productive, we now have the analytical tools with Microsoft. We know if you're not being productive. So it'll be real easy to weed those folks out. Right out. Yeah, exactly. So your next question in terms of building your team, we don't do anything alone. Again, on the DISC profile, I'm an I, which means I'm an influencer. I like working in collaborative environments. So I always build a team of people around me that can support me and I can support them. So it's been through relationships over the years, whether it's with people that are in the coaching industry, whether it's people who are in the defense contracting industry. When I was working with the company in Norfolk, the company I had been with for 10 years, I was put in a unique position where the company owner that I was supporting, he mistakenly allowed me to build all the relationships with all the folks that we were doing business with. I was getting the phone calls. He was essentially writing the checks, which is one of the reasons why I decided, it's time for me to go off and probably do some things on my own. But I had built those because relationships were important. So even when I wasn't doing business with that particular company, I would still pick up the phone and call the business development person I had a relationship with. I would track them on LinkedIn or stalk them on LinkedIn. If I saw them get a new position, new job, whatever. Hey, congratulations. How you doing? Haven't talked to you in a while. I wanted to touch base.
So that's how you found me. You were stalking me on LinkedIn.
You know it. That's exactly right. I've been tracking you on Facebook and LinkedIn. I know exactly what you've been up to. Exactly right. Yeah. And that's maintaining those relationships. And it might be a year, 2 years, 3 years, but the relationships are still there, right? And in today's social media environment, it's a lot easier to keep those connections, and sometimes a lot harder, because when you are seeing somebody on Facebook or LinkedIn, you think that you're communicating, you're up to date, you know what they're doing, but you haven't necessarily reached out and said hello, right? And that's a different thing. So you got to make sure that you still, maintain those relationships at the end of the day.
And that's a very, very good point. Relationships, we do business at the speed of relationships. I heard Donetta Watson say that. And so how important have the relationships you've built over the years been for your business?
Oh, and I mean, incredible. When I left one of the companies I was working for, when they decided to go in a different direction, I had a number of relationships with, whether it was Booz Allen, SAIC, Cubic. When I walked out and started doing business on my own, I already had those relationships. So I didn't have the corporate past performance experience, but they knew me. I had written proposals with their proposal writing teams. I had worked with all their senior managers. So when I said, hey, I'm stepping out on my own, I'd like to partner with you on this next contract opportunity that's come up, they had to go to their big bosses, their VPs, and they were the ones who vouched for me to become a teaming partner with them. So even though I hadn't, worked on my own independently, I was doing it as an advisor to another company, I'd still built and maintained those relationships. And they were key when I did decide to step out on my own and start working, directly with Charles Atwater Group to support federal government contracting.
So you talked about teaming, and a lot of people don't really understand what teaming is when you talk about when you talk about government contracting. So talk some, I see your dog in the background, so funny. So talk some about your teaming contracts and contacts. What is teaming and how do you do it?
Yeah, great question. So at the end of the day, teaming means, so when the federal government comes out with a contract, if you will, or what they call an RFP, request for proposal, it's basically the government saying, we want somebody to wash the windows on this building. And they put it out on a public site, and different companies will go off and bid on it. Part of the challenges is knowing, one, what the government's looking for, and two, who are the players in that space that are actually performing that work? Because good luck with you going in and trying to outbid somebody if you've never done that work before. So for me, one of the things I tell my clients all the time, particularly if you've never done business with the federal government before, what you need to do is you need to make sure that you are partnering with somebody who knows the business. Partner with somebody who knows the business, learn the business, and at some point, you can step out in front and you can start contracting on your own. There's a strategy behind that. I know a lot of businesses who have made a lot of money by not priming contracts. They just subcontract to other companies, which means they let the other company do the hard work. They have ultimately the legal responsibility and authority for making sure the contract is executed. And you're just a partner with them supplying, whether it's a product or whether it's employees, subcontractors, to help them meet the requirements that the government has asked for.
So have you done joining forces with other contractors to build teaming contracts and teaming agreements? And how has that been for you?
So let me give you an example of one way this is kind of an interesting example. So I had met a company through, there was a small business, basically a small business day with the National Guard Bureau several years ago. So I drove up to Arlington, Virginia. They had about 25, 30 small companies in a room, and we're all meeting and greeting, doing the networking thing. We left, met a company that was kind of doing some of the same work that I was doing. Well, about 2 years later, another company that they had subbed to on sign language was no longer eligible to do the sign language work because the sign language that contract was going to go to a small disabled veteran-owned company. And fast forward, about a year later, I was like, hey man, you guys still doing that sign language work? He goes, yeah, we're still doing it. He goes, I got so many proposals that I'm writing that I just can't keep up. I'm like, well, hey, I'll write the proposal. Can you give me a couple of bodies? I'll write the proposals. You let me submit them with you, and I get a couple of bodies on it. He's like, hey, man, that's a great idea. So he just sent me all of his information. I wrote the proposal. We won the contract. I put a couple of people on that contract, and, off we went. So, a lot of this is if you know how to write, and that's why I made the comment earlier, if you know how to write the proposals, I don't want to say that's not the hard part, but if you understand how to do that process, the other side of it is just trying to find the people that can do the work. Then you just become an HR company that you're out trying to find the people who have the qualifications, the skills, and in some cases, the security clearances that can actually do the work. So I had no clue on sign language work, but I could write a proposal.
And that's the key. You get in where you fit in, right?
Right.
So you know how to write proposals. This company had some proposals that needed to be writing. You joined forces just because you did what? Networked at this event and built a relationship. And so we have to learn how to build relationships. That's what this is all about. Also, it's about being able to communicate well. As a speaker, trainer, celebrity speaker, trainer, and coach, what I do is help you present your information better. I help you show up with energy. I help you not say, I help you understand the semantics and the speech articulation to get your message across, and with power and authority. And so those are the kinds of things that you were asking me. How do you get into the speaker arena? Do we want to talk some about what your next is?
Yeah. So, I do. I would love to. Speaking is always a lot of fun. It's engaging. So yeah, absolutely. Let's run that. Let's run that rabbit.
There are a lot of people who are afraid to speak in public. Okay. That's not your testimony, is it?
That I'm afraid to speak in public?
Yeah.
No.
So tell me, what is it about speaking, public speaking, platform speaking, show speaking, that really gets you fired up? First, I want to know that.
Yeah, I think it's connecting with the audience. Talking about a topic that you're passionate about, and again, helping them, find a way to solve some of their challenges. And I'm also very opinionated, so don't even get me on the political and cultural commentaries. But yeah, I think, again, it's part of my personality. So, being an eye on the disc profile, I like to collaborate, I like to speak. And so anytime you get a chance to get out, whether it's talking about the company or talking about the business you're in, finding ways to help people figure out what's the next best step for their companies or for their themselves personally, that's just exciting to me.
So one of the things I teach is what we call the introduction, right? And you're just meeting me for the first time. Just pretend you never met me. You don't know who I am. And you walk up to me, you see me in a room with a bunch of different people. What is the first thing you say to me? I say, hi, I'm Barbara H. Smith. And what do you do? What do you say?
Hi, Barbara. I'm Mike Hitchcock. How are you?
I'm good. What do you do? What do you answer
do?
to that? Yeah. What do you do? When I ask the question, what do you do? What do you respond back?
I'm a strategy and leadership consultant. I help people solve their most complex and challenging problems.
That is an introduction. Okay. Because I'm going, okay, so what's the problem? But when you have that conversation, what do the people say back to you? What do you get back with that answer, with that response?
Yeah, it's normally, it's like, okay, so what does that mean? So what does that really mean?
And that's perfect, because you know what it is? People are not asking you what you do. They're asking you that question, but that's not really what they're asking. What they're asking is, what's in it for me? What can you do for me? So when people ask you, so what do you do? We have to be able to articulate how we help them. What's going to make sense to the other person? Just like you said, you have to know your audience. And in order for you to know your audience, maybe instead of answering, what do you do? I turn it around and ask them, what do you do? I answer the question with a question. And then I can give them what they're looking to hear from me. Does that make sense?
It does.
I said, it does. And so that's how we start the conversation. The next step is when you're on platform, just like now, when I read your bio, people always give you a biography to read for them when they're being introduced. But the proper way, and people don't know this, is to give an introduction. All right. The introduction doesn't tell all about your background and your education, but it gives that interesting inside look about something about you that nobody else knows. Like you gave us that you were divorced, but you could use that information to intrigue the audience to want to know more, to lean in and listen to what you're saying. Now, in this setting, because we're not face to face, it's perfectly fine to give somebody the bio to read for you. Perfectly fine. There's no error in that. But what I'm talking about is when you go face to face and you typically go into a program situation and someone hands you the program with the person's biography on it, and you've had an opportunity as the guest to sit there and read the biography, and then someone else comes to introduce you. Face to face, we're talking. And they're handed the biography to read what you've already read. That's insulting. And so I teach how to do an introduction. So you have the biography. Yes, that's good information. It's all about the person. But when I step to the stage and somebody reads my introduction, here's what they say, Mike. Coming to the stage right now. At the age of 3, she was an engineer. At the age of 8, she was an instructor. And at the ripe old age of 16 years old, she was a race car driver. Help me welcome to the show, Barbara H. Smith. What just happened? It had nothing to do with my biography. It had nothing to do with my associate's degree in computer electronics, my master's degree in computer information systems, my bachelor's degree in computer science. It had nothing to do with that. But what it does is changes the trajectory of the audience's attention. And now you're leaning in going, who the heck is this girl? Does that make sense?
It does.
You just got coaching 101.
It does.
From the Barbara H. Smith Show.
Awesome.
And that's what I teach. That's part of the represent your brand. This is my segue. We really appreciate you being on the show. The represent your brand and unleash the speaker within training that I am giving a masterclass directly after the show at 9:00. Right here. Well, right here, I'm going to give you a shout out of just go to, I will send you a link to it if you're interested in participating. But it is definitely something that any speaker or someone who wants to be a speaker, and all of us are speakers. Come on, let's face the facts. We all have to convey information, and that's what a speaker is. It's not necessarily on a platform, but we all have to convey information. So I want to give you one last shot at letting us know how we can reach you. I want to say hi to the doggy. What he gave a cameo appearance. What's his name? What's her name?
Come here. Oh. There you go. You say hi?
Cameo appearance for the dog.
Cameo appearance from Didi. She probably have 4 legs crossed right now. You
can reach me at www.speakcoachtrain or www.barbarahsmith.com is my new website, which is really, really a very great place for you to contact me. But Mike, give us the last few moments. Tell us how we can reach you.
Yeah, so you can reach me at www.charlesatwatergroup.com. It's all one word, charlesatwatergroup.com.
Thank you so much, Mike. It's been my pleasure and my honor. I enjoyed your conversation. We're going to have to connect on so many levels with both our businesses. I'd love to be your executive coach on speaking. I can do this. I got this.
I know, man. You're killing it.
And we will see you next time on the Barbara H. Smith Show. Don't miss it next week. Thank you so much. And
Thanks,
I'm
Barbara.
out of here. You're
Great to
welcome.
see you. Take care now.
Great to see you.
Bye.
Thank you so much for spending time and space with me. Remember, we have the upcoming, that's a Charles Atwater group for my friend Michael Hitchcock that was just on. And I want you to know that I am so ever grateful that you're here spending time and space with me. We have a new website, www.barbarahsmith.com. Please join me on the website. Contact me if you're looking for, since you're looking for a speaker or presenter, I'm your girl. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Oh, by the way, Masterclass Giveaway. I want you to go to bit.ly/Barbara H. Smith and get on my calendar so I can show you, give you a masterclass for free. Masterclass for free, the one that we're talking about at 9 o'clock. If you jump on there, I will definitely get you in the class. Thank you again and have a great night.